Hello. Today we have with us Mr. Todd Malloy. He is the founder of Inner Peace Counseling Center here in Charlotte. He is a couple and family therapist, an ASECT certified sex therapist, and ASECT certified sexuality counselor. He specializes in relational issues, emotional distress, and sexuality issues and dysfunction. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Malloy.
Oh, I appreciate you having me. Please call me Todd. It's a whole lot easier.
Well, I try to be formal in these kinds of situations.
Yeah, and all is well. All is well.
I would like to preface our discussion by saying that I work in the gaming industry now, and I want to make sure I acknowledge that by saying what we're going to be discussing today is not unique to the gaming community. Sexual harassment and sexual assault are significant problems affecting every segment of our society.
Very
They
true.
are tragedies whenever and wherever they occur, and they have no place in our community. So I
Cool.
don't want anybody in the gaming community who may see this to think I'm singling them or us out.
Mhm.
So what led me to reach out to you was at the beginning of July, it was the week leading up to the 4th of July, the gaming community, the fighting game community in particular, was made aware of three things in particular, which, like I said, resulted in me reaching out to you. The first thing, Evo, which is the largest fighting game tournament in the world, was going to be virtual this year. Of course, they couldn't do it in person like normal because of COVID, but it was going to be virtual this year, and it was canceled because one of the founders was accused of sexual misconduct with teenage boys.
Mhm.
Later that week, one of a prominent female commentator was accused of having inappropriate contact with a player when she was 24 and he was 14. Those
Mhm.
alleged events took place in 2016, but he shared his story that first week of July. And the last thing was a tournament organizer from South Carolina was banned from the community because of sexual assault and verbal harassment of some of the females that attended his tournaments. And for full disclosure, I know that young man and I have worked with him on an event. Um, and I'm thinking about the gaming community as a whole,
Mhm.
and the vast majority of them are high school, well, in the organized tournament scene, a lot of them are high school and college kids. And shortly before I retired, one of my mentors was heavily involved in writing the Coast Guard Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Strategic Plan.
Mhm.
And it dawned on me that after I hear about these events, and I'm thinking like experienced military leaders, people who've been to leadership and management school, people who've been leading people for 20, 25, 30 years, they have a hard time dealing with this kind of stuff. So I don't think it's realistic or fair for us to expect 18 to 25-year olds who are in these communities to know how to deal with this kind of stuff
Sure.
properly and appropriately. It's tough to deal with. So I wanted to reach out to an expert such as yourself to discuss some of these kinds of things.
Yeah, I guess we have to think about it. It's such an ingrained and entrenched part of our society. It was almost normalized, unfortunately, where we have a misogynistic society, patriarchal, man-dominated society, and even I remember being a kid and watching John Wayne. He used to knock out horses, then pick up a woman, throw over her shoulder, and run her upstairs, and you're supposed to wonder what happened in the bedroom.
Ah,
Those types of things can normalize over time, can normalize those types of things. And there's potentially, for many years, there's always been a power differential between men and women. I recognize there's efforts to change that, but as a part of our society, that's still a prevalent mindset. So it
it's
is entrenched in who we potentially be entrenched in who we are as a society. That's why it's so difficult to see, and to some degree, people consider it to be subjective because what's appropriate for one person is not appropriate for the other person. And too oftentimes people normalize what behaviors they see demonstrated and displayed, and they perpetuate it.
gotcha.
However, the person that you're coming in contact to may grew up in a different house doesn't find the same behavior appropriate.
Roger that. That's true. So what I wanted to do is to help provide the gaming community some tools to help deal with sexual assault, sexual harassment, if and when they're made aware of it. So,
Well, actually, I think you should even do it before then.
okay,
Really, when and thank you for all the information you provided for me to prepare. um, I think as an organization and as an industry, you need to come up. It would be important to come up with an overall harassment, sexual harassment statement that is supported by the gaming community.
okay.
And so even in being a member of ASECT, uh, even in our
And what
organization,
is ASECT? I'm sorry to interrupt. What is ASECT again?
ASEC is the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, which I am still a voting member and former board of directors member.
Thank you.
Uh, in, a, in our 50 plus year history, most recently we came up with our own sexual harassment statement as an organization. And even at our conventions, you will see banners and different things about what is acceptable behavior and what is unacceptable behavior, where it is published for everyone to see, even in the midst of events. Because, truth be told, anytime you get a group of people together, there's an opportunity for an offense.
This is true.
So, such that we can normalize it for everybody, understanding here's the code or here's the standard based on this organization and this environment that you're in. Here is the appropriate standard and protocol to minimize confusion and conflict. So for your industry to create their own standard and appropriate protocol and publish it and display it at events already establishes a tone and creates the appropriate culture, as opposed to being that's more proactive as opposed to reactive. If once the event happens, you're being reactive.
That's true. Yeah, we
We
want to definitely
need to
be proactive.
focus more on prevention than cleaning up the mess later.
Outstanding. I appreciate that. That's wise words. So first and foremost, well, this will be second since we've just established that prevention is the key. Um, how do we get victims the help and the support they need?
Well, there are a number of things. Number one is that when people disclose, allow them the freedom to disclose, encourage the disclosure, but also then in turn providing them necessary resources like like some mental health professional, someone particularly trained in the sexual trauma or in the sexual health orientation, and provide them the resources necessary to be successful. It's not about keeping it quiet because remember, there's an offense. People have been, that's a trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on their lives prior to this trauma can connect to other traumas and have a rippling effect in the many layers of their lives. So seeking out professional help and having those resources, depending on where they are, whether they're state-wise, whatever, just say, you can go to Psychology Today, put in your zip code and identify that you're looking for, a sex therapist, sexuality counselor, things of that nature to provide resources and supports to help. But like I have in my office and varying places that we go, we always keep like a referral source. We may be only about 3 people that we've made contact with, we've introduced ourselves to them, and they're saying, hey, we potentially, should we ever have this type of situation, we'd like to refer our players to this 1, 2, 3 people. Are you open to doing that? And most people say yes. I say yes to many people that call me because I deal with some churches and things of that nature when they have people that have been assaulted or things of that nature or offended in somehow, they use me as a resource.
Okay, good deal. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
So, and you kind of have addressed the next question I had, but I'll ask anyway. And that was, what steps should be taken if a tournament organizer is notified that someone has been harassed or assaulted at one of their events? And I want to make sure, like, video game tournaments oftentimes are multi-day events. So while somebody may not be assaulted during gameplay, because you're there from Thursday to Sunday, there is
Sure.
ample time while you're not actually playing for something
Mhm.
uh, to happen.
No, but again, is that it's to identify who those safe people are. You know, whether it's the board of directors, the needed facility, the commentator, whoever. You have to identify this. That's a part of the pre-work and being proactive. Not only making a statement, but should there be an event, here are the people that you can contact or come in this particular area.
Okay.
And to do that. And again, by making the public statement, it kind of calls the order to the room. When
Gotcha.
you know also in the midst of those events, and I'm assuming that even in those events as in others, you have organizers that are watching what's going on, making sure the flow of the flow of the event is happening appropriately. Is that
Mm-hmm.
fair?
Yes, sir.
But they also need to be watching and listening for offenses as defined by the organization.
Roger.
Right. So as you're watching, you're also policing the area to make sure that all things are decent and in order.
Okay.
You know,
No
we don't
good.
have to make this rocket science. We can do some basic. You already have people in place. You already have organizers. They could be the safety team. They may have all blue jackets or a badge on or whatever the case may be. And then they're trained to know that, hey, should this happen, make this call. Here's the escalation process.
Gotcha. Okay. What
And go
now
ahead.
I'm gonna complicate it a little bit.
No,
One of the situations that I mentioned earlier,
mm,
the offender was actually the organizer. One of the
mm.
people that you're saying should probably be a safe person, someone that you would notify. So
Correct. But
what would a
think
person
about it
do in
this
that
way.
situation?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, if as an organization and you have already a broad and general statement, that will help police those types of individuals anyway, because they already know they're being watched.
Okay,
When there is no standard, there are no rules.
it's the Wild West. It's the Wild West.
So by establishing the standard, you help control that type of behavior.
Okay.
Number, number two is that I also think that the organizers themselves should go through sexual harassment training so they can clearly know what it is and recognize that they're held to the letter of the law. And even if you go on, there's a number of resources, if you Google it, a number of resources that provide that type of training, and they have videos that they use in the Fortune 500 companies, things of that nature. I believe North Carolina created their own sexual harassment training video that everybody has access to. So by providing the training to organizers and to those safe people, already establishes the standard and the protocol and recognize as you're sharing with them that offenders will be prosecuted. So, like for even in our organization, if someone is notified of a sexual offense, you not only can you could lose your license, you can lose your profession. You are actually kicked out of the organization, or you lose your certification as a sex therapist, educator, counselor. And whatever state holds your mental health license, this is also reported.
Hmm.
So there is a direct impact to that person.
Gotcha. That's important. Their consequences are necessary.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. So we we focus on talking about the victims in these kinds of situations, but
Mhm.
oftentimes perpetrators have been victimized previously.
Seriously. Correct.
So
Correct.
how do we get perpetrators the help they need? And the second part of that question is, um, are they serial, or do these tend to be one-off kind of situations?
My training and my experience says it's more serial than one-offs.
Okay.
Yes, you can add drugs, you can add alcohol in it and get the one-offs. And just because people have thoughts and ideations don't mean that they always act on them. The offense is the acting on it, not the thought.
Okay.
So, but yes, how we would define it is under what I would do is recommend the Harvey Institute. The Harvey Institute, Doug Harvey Braun is the founder and one of the key principals there, developed a training which is called Out of Control Sexual Behavior. And if by going to the website, the Harvey Institute of Sexual Health, if you Google it, there are a number of resources that you will list all over the country, all over the world actually, that will facilitate people that have the appropriate training and resources to facilitate the perpetrator. Because everybody needs help. There are a number of resources out there available, but that will give you an national, if not global, resources that will provide the appropriate help that they need to be successful.
Okay. And what's uh, the prognosis, or how do perpetrators typically fare after they've gone through uh, treatment or rehabilitation,
Well,
or what do
in
you?
his program, he's had high levels of success. Nothing's 100%, but he's high 80s. But what it does, the training, what it does is works on their own, uh, pulls from their own moral character, their own standards. Everybody has a code of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
They may vary, but we all have one. And we have to tap into that to help facilitate them to moderate the behavior, understanding the associated consequences and the harm that's being done as a result and how it violates their own standard of ethics.
Gotcha. Okay.
Once you recognize how it impacts you, the individual, how it erodes who you are, the people that you have skin in the game and a loss, tends to give a level of accountability in its most simplistic explanation.
Gotcha. So the events that I mentioned earlier, much of the
Mhm.
notification and the discussion around those events took place on social media. Probably not the best forum to have this kind of
Correct.
discussion in, and uh, unfortunately, you see the good and the bad of all of the thought processes and the opinions of folks. Uh,
Mhm.
there were a couple of things that concerned me while reading through the comments, and one of them was there was a demand for an apology from uh, one of the perpetrators, and he actually apologized. But once he apologized, there was a, well, how come you didn't tell me Todd was assaulted on this day and time and what you did to him? And is that appropriate to include in an apology, or?
I wouldn't think not, because what you do is a re-victimization of the offended, of the victim. It's re-victimizing the event, the victim, because you take their power and control away from them coming to terms with their own situation, letting them choose whether they want to disclose publicly or not.
Okay.
That's their story. No one else should tell their story, and they choose when, where, and how, and to whom they share their story. We shouldn't make that choice for them because their rights have already been taken away. Their power. Remember, those types of situations, even though it's sexual in nature, is really about power and control,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about you attempting, if not taking away, the power of someone else.
Okay.
So to now negate their voice and openly disclose them, and not just their name, but then what actually happened to them. That again, that's a re-trauma. I see that as re-traumatizing.
Okay. So we definitely don't want to do that. So what is a tactful and
Oh,
appropriate way
and
to?
actually, when in your presentation before and sharing that information, it's almost like a voyeuristic behavior. Like the person that really wants to know is trying to. They have their own issues.
Gotcha.
Why would you? Why would you want to go graphically all the way through someone's offense and then know who it is. So now when you see them, that's the person with the scarlet letter.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. So, what is a tactful and appropriate way for to make a public apology without re-victimizing and or outing the victim?
Well, is by taking ownership for their inappropriate behavior and acknowledging how they recognize they've offended those persons that they come in contact with, and and created a shadow over the organization. And for that, they're apologetic for their own acts and the behaviors of which they hold themselves accountable for. It's just to keep it focused on them.
So I
Focus
did this
them
thing.
and right, right.
I'm sorry about the thing that I did and how it affected the people that I come in contact with and the organization that I'm a part of.
Right, right, exactly. And how I've tainted the name of the organization and disrespected and shamed my family in regard to those people that were directly impacted. But as far as that's concerned, because they're taking ownership for their piece of the puzzle. But then for those people, those other individuals, should they want to come out and disclose, they should have the autonomy to do that. They should not be further violated by having their rights taken away or exposed when they may not want to be exposed.
Okay. So victims often have complicated relationships with their abusers. And so, how do we explain why victims sometimes continue to speak with, communicate via phone or text message, or basically maintain a relationship with someone who's abused them? Because this is one of the ways that I see often how victims get re-victimized and blamed for what happened to them because, well, if it was so bad, why'd you keep talking to him? Why'd you maintain contact with her? Why?
You, Very true. And I will give you responses that I get from clients that have been suffered. It's shame. Some of it is shame, embarrassment, humiliation. Some people feel they victimize themselves because they feel they played a part in it and allowed it to happen. Also, then you have the conflicting relationships, wherein I think Cinnamon,
Senpai. Mm-hmm.
yeah, Senpai, her relationship with the young boy, she's 24, he's 14. They had already established a friendship relationship. And in the course of her manipulation of him, she's also explaining to him not to disclose, and we have to maintain an anonymity so nobody knows because we have to protect each other. There was already a loyalty established.
Mm, gotcha.
And he manipulated the situation with power and control, but also so it created a conflict for the boy. Do I disclose or do I not disclose? Because I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't.
Mm-hmm.
If I disclose, then I hurt someone that I care about. But she also said, but if I just wait till I'm 18, she'll reconnect with me.
Yeah.
But then emotionally, I'm dealing with some things that I can't discuss or get help from someone else. So now I'm suppressing these feelings and emotions. What am I supposed to do? And people fail to recognize the brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, where we make the executive decisions, doesn't fully develop until your late 20s.
Mm. That's why our insurance is high till we're 25 as guys, huh?
Ah, right. So, but with that being said, we're expecting traumatized young people to function like fully responsible adults.
Mm.
How fair is that?
It's not fair at all. But
Exactly.
that's why we're having this conversation.
Exactly. I talked to many people that have been assaulted by family members. When you're assaulted by your stepfather, but your mother knows, and she still expects you to come to Thanksgiving dinner in front of the family and be okay. How do you say no?
That's tough. I'm glad unfortunately I never had to go through that.
Exactly, but this is common. I have women that were molested, raped, or assaulted at 14, and I'm the first one they told at 56.
Wow.
I have men that have been assaulted when they were kids that have created sexual issues in their married life, And because there are men that have mentioned being sexually assaulted, the wives will say, "Don't be a punk, man up. You should be over that by now."
Man, well, that actually kind of leads me to my next question because, and you mentioned senpai. So the discussion about, or I won't say the whole discussion, but some of the discussion about his mentioning what happened to him was, and she's an attractive young lady.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wish I could. There was a lot of snark and a lot of I wish I could have been taken advantage of by a 24-year-old, a cute 24-year-old when I was 14. Or so, how does that affect how men in particular come forward about being taken advantage of sexually?
Because that again, he's being shamed. So why would I do that? People mock me and make fun. Is sex about moving pieces and parts, or is it about an intimate emotional connection?
An intimate emotional connection.
At 14, there's a big gap between a 14-year-old and a 24-year-old.
Indeed.
Therefore, they're not equal players. So they're coming from, there's a power differential there that therefore leaves the 14-year-old in a situation where it's not a loving, affectionate situation, it's where you're being taken advantage of, manipulated, and
Mm-hmm.
marginalized, objectified, may be a better word. So that's the relationship. And so think about it this way. Let's say I have a 8-year-old son, and we go to the come on son, go to the gym, and I say lift this 150-pound weight.
That's,
It's too much too soon
yeah. It's,
because mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, I'm just hitting puberty.
mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to figure out my body and how it works and so forth. Meanwhile, you're giving me advanced studies.
Yeah. You're in a master's class.
Exactly. So even from the Erickson psychosocial development cycle, there's stages that we have to go through successfully in order to be responsible adults. Sexually, I'll use John Money's where he calls love maps, and there's a normal progression through your sexual development and evolution that will facilitate healthy sexual relationships going forward. Because particularly if you're having sex with someone significantly older than you, it creates huge gaps. He calls it vandalism. It vandalizes their ability to develop properly and can create unhealthy sexual behaviors because it's so much is happening, you don't really understand it, so you don't know how to organize it in your brain. So therefore, you could take an offense, something that happened to you, normalize it, and perpetuate that in other situations.
Mm.
So, for example, now that the young man that was offended by senpai and he's been orally copulated, all of these different things. Now, what does he do with that energy when she's not available?
I have no idea.
Because once you've opened the cookie jar, it's hard to close it.
Gotcha.
And I'm trying to be I'm trying not to be graphic here, but I think we all know what I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once you get started, it's always hard to stop. One lays potato chip. Once you've eaten one, you can't stop. So how does he express himself? And he's surrounded by other people 14 years old, but he's used to a 24-year-old person. There's a case that I'm familiar with here in town that a young man in high school was having relations with an adult woman that was bringing him to school.
Mm-hmm.
This same young man was arrested for sexually assaulting a senior citizen next door neighbor.
Mm.
This same young man lived in a house with his grandmother and his sister, and they had to sleep with the doors locked because in the middle of the night while they was asleep, he would come in and watch them in self pleasure or fondle them while they were sleeping.
Wow.
So once you begin to introduce these things too much too soon,
Mm-hmm.
it mutates into could potentially mutate into almost anything.
Wow. That's so that young man definitely needs to speak with someone sooner rather than later if he hasn't already, huh?
Well, the young man that I'm particularly talking about was incarcerated.
Oh, I was actually talking about the uh, senpai.
Senpai?
Yeah.
Right. My point is this: he's had to, whether he's self-pleasured or so forth, but it creates an energy of stress. There's a release required now.
Mm-hmm.
There's feelings, there's emotions, there's urges. What do you do with that when you don't? You're living in secrecy.
Yeah. That's tough.
Exactly. We as adults have hard times. I have men and married men and women when now that they've been sexually active in their marital relationship and it's cut off and it's not made available, they come into my office to talk about the stress and how it's hard for them to cope even as adults. Put that responsibility on a 14-year-old.
Mm. Yeah. Ah, that's really unfortunate. Now, why does our society, had the roles been reversed and it been a male and a female, the response is about 180 degrees out. So why does our
It's sad. It's
society?
sad. It's sad. Yeah, it's very sad. But it goes back to you know the stereotypes. Uh, guys are rough and tough, girls are sugar and spice and everything nice. It's
But
just it's how we're structured as a society. So yes, the man would do it, but no different than and I apologize if I offend people, but I think the entanglement between Jada Pinkett Smith and her son's friend.
August,
It was an entanglement. No, well, how I understood it was, well, I was helping him. Well, here's a young man that had already been sexually assaulted, molested, and all of these other things, and you're helping him by repeating
the
what was
problem.
done.
Yeah.
How was that a help? But yet she had empathy amongst a number of people. But let's say it was her husband did it with his daughter's friend.
Yeah.
Would
That's
people feel the same way?
oh
And
no. It's
I
an
think
entirely
this
different
just it
conversation.
just shows the ills of our just society and the hypocrisy within our own society.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned that sexual assault was it's more power and it's an act of violence, but it often masquerades as an act of intimacy. So there aren't normally a lot of witnesses. So they end up being he said, she said events where our society essentially blames the victim for their decisions after the fact. Well, you maintain contact, you did this, you did that. And we often don't deal with the alleged perpetrators' actions in the moment.
Hmm.
How is there a way to change that paradigm, or can we? Why do
Well,
we do that?
we changed the paradigm by having the discussions we're having now. We changed the paradigm by organizations being proactive and establishing the appropriate standards and reestablish creating a new culture opposed to the one that is currently being perpetuated.
Gotcha.
you know, Blaming the victim we've done in this country, we've done since the beginning of this country.
Yeah.
Remember, think about this. The oppressor always blames the oppressed.
Indeed.
And I hope I said that nice, but I'm hitting a whole lot of people.
It's
But
true though.
that's perpetuated through the many layers of our society. And at some point, as we become more enlightened as a society and recognizing the validity and value of people and how we all have a right to feel safe, be emotionally, mentally, physically safe and secure, I think we'll be better off. So again, it's these types of conversations, organizations providing these levels of training, creating statements, creating standards will facilitate that.
Outstanding. My last question, I believe, is there a way to ensure victims are heard while also preserving the alleged perpetrator's presumption of innocence?
Um, it's not going to be clean because once someone discloses, however, and I will use our organization is that when it's disclosed, we do not publicize it. We disclose once it is disclosed, it is only shared with the appropriate people within the organization. And then we get the offended party is able to share their information. We connect directly with the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator, and then there's a counsel based on the data and an associated repercussion if one is required.
Gotcha.
And then still we keep that in house. It's not like it's made public. We don't make big broad statements about it, but what we do is maintain the standard and the culture that we've established in regards to that matter.
Okay.
So, however, do people find out or hear? Yes, but again, you
Not
try to
from the
contain it
organization.
as much as possible.
Gotcha. Discretion.
But think about this though. And possibly part of how it's been disclosed through social media this way and now exposing everyone is because there is no protocol, there is no standard, there is no culture already
Ah,
pre-established. So that was the safest out they had because there was no other means established or identified.
makes sense. Makes sense. Now, I reached out to you because I was particularly concerned about victims and how we can actually help them deal with the trauma that they've experienced. I would like to know at what point does law enforcement need to be involved, or because we've talked about all of this stuff and we haven't mentioned.
Law enforcement involvement is you can't, to my knowledge, you can't disclose for someone. They have to disclose for themselves.
Okay.
However, but once you're made aware of it, you can make yourself available to facilitate them going.
Now, is it if you're aware of a situation
Mm-hmm.
and someone is uh, not ready to disclose, what's your what's the responsible thing as someone who is in the know? Is it insensitive to encourage them to go and report it?
I don't think it's insensitive to encourage. I would, because obviously I have a license and I'm a part of a number of associations, I document everything.
Mm-hmm.
And however, in that, I recommend that you go to law enforcement, that you get this involved. Here are the steps and measures that I think you should take in order to make sure that you're well. Here's what I'm capable of doing, and this is what I can provide you. But here are the resources, the collective resources I think that you need to move forward, and I will facilitate being an advocate for you to help you have the strength to move through this process.
Okay. Good deal. I just
I've done that on a number of occasions.
Okay. Now I was just conflicted if because I run tournaments, so if
Yeah.
someone makes me aware of it, me mentally wanting to fix the problem, I'm,
Mm-hmm.
hey, well, we need to do this, this, this. I can't do this for you. You
But
need to go do that. So
in the
I
midst
just
of you
don't want
wanting to,
to, if they're not
right,
ready to disclose, I don't want to uh, shove them out into the street.
right,
So,
but you don't want to. You as you're walking through the process, you don't want to take away their voice, but you can encourage it and support why.
okay.
So, for example, I have a client that was assaulted and almost killed. And
Mm,
I encouraged her to go to law enforcement and so forth and so forth. And in the midst of that, found out that this person had done this before, but no one had followed through on the legal process and law
wow.
enforcement involvement. It basically set her up. This is something he had been doing for 10 years.
Wow.
It's just so now it's not until in his 40s is he being held accountable for this type of action and behavior.
Man.
And I didn't force anything, but I encouraged it and I supported her to have the strength to value herself enough
Mm-hmm.
to use her voice on her behalf.
Gotcha. Man, that's tough. Um, wow. Well, I don't have any more questions for you, sir. Is there any parting wisdom or knowledge that you'd like to share with someone who may have been a victim or actually a perpetrator of a sexual assault or harassment?
My thing is this: whenever we're having mental, physical, or emotional struggle, and I'll just say emotional struggle, mental struggle primarily, because it's something, if we break a leg or we're physically hurt, we instinctively go to a doctor. Mental and emotional wounds are just as impactful as physical wounds, and we need to seek out help. We don't have to suffer in silence. So, whether you're a victim or a perpetrator, there's a struggle, there's a conflict going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I just encourage you to get help because there is help out here. Will you allow yourself to do it and not allow the stereotypes of society or family secrets hinder you from getting the help you need so you can have a life worth celebrating? That you can have the comfort, the peace, the joy, the life experiences you truly deserve to have. And my thing is this: I want to thank you for even using this. Even being in the gaming industry, you could just stay focused on your gaming and keep it moving. But you're taking the time to do this and to present this and other similar podcasts to help people.
Yes,
So
sir.
again, I applaud you for what you're doing and the sincerity upon which you're doing it.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Wow. Well, my friend, I appreciate your time.
No, thank you.
Mr.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored.
Ah, you're quite welcome. So this is once again Mr. Todd Malloy, founder of Inner Peace Counseling Center. You have a phone number and a website you want to share with the people?
Right. Well, you can go to innerpeacecounselingcenter.com or you can reach out to us at 704-937-2286.
Thank you, sir. My name is Dwayne Meekins. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great one.
All right. Take care.
Will do. You too, sir.